Hello, calculus. The first thing that we want to do for number 1 is we want to rewrite this and get rid of that weird trig notation. That exponent, 7, applies to everything immediately to the left and to the right of it. So if you rewrite it as the cosine of 10x, all to the 7th, you can easily see which is the outermost function. So there are 3 functions: trig function cosine, linear function 10x, and something to the 7th. Something to the 7th is our outermost. Okay, you can only have one function here. So if we start with 3, there can only be 1 here, so there has to be 2 here. So the inner as is always everything else, the cosine of 10x. Now we know there's another chain because we counted the functions, 3 functions, 2 chains. We can also catch it here. This is still a composite function, 1x, 2 separate functions. So here, the outer function is cosine. So our second function, their second chain, the outer function is cosine, and the inner function is 10x. This is no longer, 10x. This is no longer a composite function. That's one single function. All right, when we do the chain rule, and there's more than one chain, on the first chain, you only do the first 2 steps of the chain rule. You take the derivative of the outer, and then you plug in the inner as is. Then you start over and go to the second chain. On the second chain, the last chain, you do all 3 steps. Okay, so it's going to look like this. Okay, y prime. We go to the first chain. The derivative of something to the 7th, the derivative of the outer, using the power rule, is 7 times something to the 6th. That is our derivative of the outer, the first step. Now we go to the second step and we plug in the inner as is. So the cosine of 10x goes right there. That is the inner as is. All right, we've done the first 2 steps. Now we start over and we go to the second chain. For the first step, the derivative of the outer, the derivative of the cosine is negative sine. So parentheses, so it doesn't look like subtraction, negative sine, blank set of parentheses. Every time you take the derivative of the outer, you put in a blank set of parentheses. So that is the derivative of the outer. Now we go to the second step and we plug in the inner as is. So that goes right here, 10x. So that is the inner as is. And finally, on the last step, or on the last chain, don't forget that last step. What's the derivative of the inner? The derivative of 10x, using the power rule, is times 10. All right, so that is our derivative of the inner. All right, so right here, this whole part here, let's see, what color haven't I used yet? Let's try pink. Okay, this whole piece here is chain 1. And then this piece here, that is chain 2. All right, so that's a double chain. When we simplify it, here's what has to go out front. The coefficient 7, the coefficient -1, and the coefficient 10. So our final best full credit answer, y prime, if we multiply through those 3 together, we get -70 out front. We still have the cosine of 10x to the 6th, and we still have a sine of 10x. Yay! All right, let's go to number 9. Again, let's rewrite it. This 4/5 applies to everything immediately to the left and to the right of it. So that would be -10. And then we have the cosine of 7x all to the 4/5. Okay, again, we see 3 functions. Cosine, trig function, linear, 7x, and then something to the 4/5. We are 4/5ing these two functions. This is our outermost. So we have negative 10, don't forget the coefficient out front, times something to the 4/5. That is our outer function. You can only have one function here, so everything else is here. So the inner as is the cosine of 7x. All right, now we go again. That's still a composite function. Here, our outer function is cosine, because we're cosining 7x. Remember, the outer function is the function that's doing something to the other function, and our inner function is 7x. Okay, here we go. Y prime. All right, negative 10 comes along for the ride. The derivative of our outer function is going to be 4/5 times something. If we take 4/5 and subtract off 5/5, we get something to the negative 1/5. That's the derivative of the outer. I'm going to make 10 a fraction. So this is the derivative of the outer on our first chain. Now we go to the second step, and we plug in the inner as is right here. So the inner as is the cosine of 7x. So there's our inner as is. All right, on the first chain, we only take the first two steps, and then we start over. We go to the second chain. Okay, the second chain, the derivative of the outer, the derivative of the cosine is negative sine. Negative sine. Remember, when we take the derivative of the outer, we always put in a blank set of parentheses. Now we go to the second step. We plug in the inner as is right here. So that is 7x. So again, this is the derivative of the outer, and this is the inner as is. And don't forget now, on the last chain, we have to take the last step, and that is the derivative of the inner. The derivative of 7x is 7, using the power rule, times 7. So that's the inner as is. And that is our second chain. There we go. So this piece right here is our first chain, and here is our second chain. Now when we simplify it, we have to multiply the three numbers. I'm going to highlight them. All right, we have negative 10 over 1, positive 4/5, and then we have 7 right here. And it wouldn't be the worst idea to make 7 a fraction. Okay, so if we multiply these three numbers together, if we multiply the tops, 10 times 4 is 40. 40 times 7 would be 280, and then 280 divided by 5 would give us, I think, negative 56. So we would have negative, for our final best full credit answer, we have negative 56 out front. We still have a cosine of 7x, all to the negative 1/5, and then we still have a sine of 7x. There we go. Okay, last one, calculus. Let's count the number of functions. I see something to the 4th. I see something to the 3rd. I see a trig function sine, and I see a linear function. So we have 4 functions. The number of chains is always 1 less than the number of functions, so that means we have 3 chains. Okay, what is the outermost? Well, this 4 is outside of the bracket, so that 4 applies to everything. So our outermost function is something to the 4th. You can only have 1 function here, so if we start with 4 and we have 1 here, we need 3 here. And the inner as is always everything else. So the inner as is the sine of 2x minus 3 to the 3rd. All right, now we go again. What is the outermost here? Well, this 3 only applies to this. So we're taking the sine of 2x minus 3 to the 3rd. So this is our outermost function, and that's tricky. So our outermost is sine, and then you can only have one function here, so then we need everything else here. The inner as is 2x minus 3 to the third. All right, now we go again. What's the outer here? Something to the third. All right, and then the inner as is would be 2x minus 3. And again, we're down to one single function. This is not a composite, so we're done. So again, this 4 applies to these 3 functions. That's the outermost of everything, so that's the outer function for the first chain. Everything else is the inner. Then we go again. Here, we're taking the sine of 2x minus 3 to the third, so this is outer and this is inner. And then for the last chain, something to the third is our outer, and that's our inner. Now, the beauty of 3 chains is you do not have to simplify at all. Again, for the earlier chains, you only do the first 2 steps. All right, so the first chain, first 2 steps. Oh, and there's the dogs barking. Hold that thought. Okay, we're back on the second chain. Again, only the first 2 steps, and then you start over. And then finally, on the last chain, you do all 3 steps of the chain rule. All right, here we go. Chain number 1. The derivative of something to the fourth is 4 times something to the third. Second step, we plug in the inner as is. So we squeeze that in, the sine of 2x minus 3 to the third. There's the first 2 steps. All right, derivative of the outer, inner as is. Now we start over and go to the second chain. What's the derivative of the sine? Cosine. Blank set of parentheses. There's the first step. The derivative of the outer is cosine. The inner as is, we plug it in right there. So we plug in 2x minus 3 to the third. So there's the first 2 steps for the second chain. Derivative of the outer, the derivative of the sine is cosine, the inner as is, right here. Now we start over and we finally get to our third chain. What's the derivative of something to the third? Using the power rule, that is 3 times something to the second. All right, now we plug in the inner as is right here. 2x minus 3. And finally, on the last chain, don't forget the last step. The derivative of the inner function. Using the power rule, the derivative of 2x is 2. The derivative of negative 3 is 0. And 2 minus 0 is 2. So that goes on the end right here. There you have it. So this is the first chain, first 2 steps. This is the second chain, first 2 steps. And finally, this is the third chain, all 3 steps. Again, you do not have to simplify anything more than 2 chains. Goodbye, calculus.